questions of the day. Has man lost his purpose, his creativity, leading to a marginal existence? Today I'm joined by Teddy McClendon from McClendonReport.com, and we're going to talk about lost spirits in the material world. Teddy, let's get right into this today.
Okay.
You know, it's one of the things I want to discuss today is, has mankind lost its civility? Has it lost its ability to reason? And has it lost its ability to embrace a higher consciousness? Let's start first with civility here. What's the root of this problem?
Well, you know something, civility is not really a real deeply spiritual issue. What I found is that civility really comes from your home training. It comes from what your parents have instilled to you in you early on in life. The lessons that they taught you, in whatever way they taught you those lessons, that's home training there. Civility comes from home training. I don't think that that's necessarily innate, and I don't think it's a spiritual thing.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So what about in terms of being polite to someone?
Right.
That's something that should be learned
at home.
Okay.
Yes.
But it's not happening. So what might be the missing link there when someone cuts you off in traffic, when someone curses you out, when someone simply decides to give you some sort of scowling look? Right. Where's that coming from?
You know something, and we're going to get into the deeper issues here, but back, on that issue of civility and people being rude or cutting you off or what have you, any of the micro and macro insults that you may face throughout the day, home training would obviate that, because we never had this discussion, but sometimes when you're about to be mean or civilized or harsh or brutish, don't you hearken back to lessons you were taught by our parents?
Yes, definitely.
I mean, even at your, this age that you're at now, don't you often think about that?
I think about it quite often,
And so my point is, a whole lot of people don't think about that because it never happened.
Okay. Okay.
They were never taught those lessons early in life.
How can you get step 2 if you never had access to step 1? Right. Okay, this is making sense, because it puzzles me a lot of times when, I'll be waiting in line and someone will just cut right in front of me. And it makes me think, I'm like, oh, here's a grown person cutting in line. So they probably did it in the lunchroom at their high school.
Yes.
They probably did it in elementary school.
Yes.
And they probably never were taught not to do it, or never disciplined for that particular
Never
matter.
admonished for that type of antisocial behavior. Whereas when you have home training, you're admonished on a daily, if not hourly, basis.
So we are lost spirits in this material world, and I think we're realizing more and more of this in the new millennium. We've got excellent technology. Of course, on the big picture, we have it all over the table here with e-books. We've got two iBooks here as well. But that has nothing to do with how mankind treats.
Not at all. And we can take it to the next level. First beginning once again with the home training. That's perhaps why it's actually in the Bible about sparing the rod and spoiling the child. You say, well, where did that saying come from in a spiritual book? Well, it's because you have to dissuade that child from being foolish.
Okay.
You see? And so it's saying that you're the custodian of that child early on. Later in life, that child, which is that adult, is going to be the custodian of his or her own self then. But in the early stages, it's the parent as the custodian over that child, so that that child doesn't go into disarray or it doesn't run amok. That
is well articulated, because I think early we've reached the big picture moment with lost spirits in the material world. Spare the rod, spoil the child. So you find that it's a serious matter in society when people don't discipline their children.
It's a serious matter. And it occurred to me when I went to the Air Force as an 18-year-old, right out of high school. I would see behaviors in some of my peers and behaviors in just adults in general, in the adult world. And I says, well, didn't they learn that at home? Weren't they taught better than that? And the answer is they probably weren't.
Yeah. You know, this is sad because if people aren't getting quote unquote good home training, the question becomes, will they ever get it anywhere? Now, and then people say, well, you know, this is where you get into the blame game. It's the school's fault. It's the parents' fault. It's the teacher's fault. It's society's fault. And then when you say it's society's fault, that becomes a cop-out, because anytime you use society, there's no one to point the finger at.
Right.
You know, it's a canned statement that bears really, it bears no relevance or significance.
Right. Like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So starting at the early formative stages, this discipline should come from the parents. But like you're advancing this discussion by saying that a lot of times it does not. So then what happens? And so then it is the school, you know. It is the school with corporal punishment, if you will. It is the school with detention. It is the school with suspension. It is the school with expulsion if necessary. And then after that, what's the third tier? It's probably the penal system.
Yes.
You see? And it's unfortunate that it has to go to that stage, because it could have been nipped in the bud when that child was 5 years old.
Right. Right. Now, this is interesting, and I'm glad you used the term advanced, because I've got a lot in my mind right now. I'm thinking about Michael Moore's film, Bowling for Columbine, you know, and it's interesting that there were 68 murders due to handguns in England last year, over 11,000 in the United States. Right. And it really makes us know that our society is based on fear. But above and beyond that, where does that fear come from? And a lot of times it comes from a lack of discipline.
Yes.
And it comes from xenophobia.
Yes,
you know,
indeed.
now, let's move forward with this civility thing, because,
sure.
see, I'm really feeling you here. So when a child is in fifth, is 5 years old, 6, 7 years old, and they're not getting the home training, teachers in school may try to give them some sort of home training. And if they're failing in the schools, we're going to have a person who does grow up and ends up in the criminal justice system.
Right, very well could be. Unless, of course, there's an intermediary, or someone that intercedes in the life of a youngster, which you find with a lot of successful people, or people who are leading nice, honest and decent lives. If they didn't have the parental involvement, there's usually someone at the boys club, the YWCA, a teacher that takes a special interest, some kind of mentor, an older sibling, a cousin, an aunt and uncle that says, listen, let me sit you down and tell you something about how you should be conducting yourself. So all is not lost, but generally there has to be some sort of mentoring to bring a person into the realm of civility.
Scientists believe that a child's personality is molded between the ages of 3 and 5.
Indeed.
After 5 years old, the personality really doesn't change beyond that. And so many times it's just simply too late, you know, after that. I want to talk to you about this, though. What does Teddy McClendon think about parents giving children a timeout instead of... Instead of spanking them, instead of grounding them? No, you may not play PlayStation or have television. No, you may not have milk and cookies right now. What do you think about sparing the rod and just saying, you know what, let's take a timeout?
I have no problem with the concept of the timeout, but the timeout has to have enforcement.
Explain.
Now, the enforcement could be the withholding of privileges. The enforcement could be, and when I say withholding of privileges, I don't mean wavering. I mean, if you withhold that privilege, it has to be withheld, okay? But I think the process is facilitated if at the outset some severe corporal punishment is administered.
Okay, so keep going.
So that the timeouts will have some validity, some muscle, some enforcement. In other words, some reinforcement.
Okay.
So what I mean, though, is the corporal punishment might only have to be administered 1 or 2 times.
Right.
Maybe in the course of the kid's lifetime, once he gets to the point.
Right.
And then timeout, it will be quite sufficient. You know, it's a timeout.
Right.
And then it's timeout then.
Right, right. So what we're dealing with here is not necessarily a motivation to be good, but a motivation not to be bad.
Yes.
You know, yes. It's almost a cybernetic concept.
And then you, indeed, and then you infuse a kid's interests you know, what you want to do is get them so that being bad is not even an option.
Right.
You want to make the kid creative. You want to make the kid a learner, someone that's fun to be around, you see, an enriched human being. So that's what we're going for. I know our discussion is going into child rearing a little bit here rather than spirituality, but that's at the basis right there. And then from there, you can advance.
And children are spirits in this material world. They're going to grow up to be adults that carry some sort of spirit that's going to either benefit mankind or it's going to hinder it.
Indeed.
And we see who commits crimes? Adult men. That's who commit the crimes.
Right.
And it's really sad that we have to move, to that particular realm of the discussion.
Right.
Let's get back though to this thing about the timeout, because you just threw Piaget and Dr. Spock right out the window. And see, I want to call you on this because there are many people that are going to be watching the big picture saying that Teddy McClendon, he believes in beating children. Now, what's the difference between spanking, beating, and abuse?
Spanking is making it sting enough to know that the aberrant behavior can be associated with some pain, a consequence.
Okay.
Because life is going to do that to you also.
If they're not corrected, later on down the line, they're going to be spanked more severely, in another form.
In another form.
Beating.
So it's just the association with pain, the pain that you might encounter in your life.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the beating was when it goes beyond the pale. I mean, it goes beyond the effectiveness. That's when the child is in absolute submission and running for his or her very life. Some people subscribe to that. And
the parent is actually angry instead of thinking about discipline or punishment.
Right, that's key.
Right, in a beating, the parent is actually angry.
That's key right there.
What about flat out blatant abuse of a child?
And that's a problem of the parent that the parent needs to get looked into about. That's an issue for therapy right there.
Right, that's DCFS.
It is.
And that's the punitive system again.
Is.
So can we go on record today saying that the McClendon report basically believes in mild corporal punishment, spanking, as opposed to...
Indeed.
Okay.
And I'm more in favor of veiled and not so veiled threats. Okay. I'll give you a veiled threat here before we go to the break.
Okay.
Our own father, okay? Now, I probably got a whole lot more spankings than you. You came up in another generation. Me and my older brother, no, okay? But the biggest threat to me as I got older was when he could do push-ups. We were 8, 9, 10 years old, and this guy could do push-ups with us on his back. 2 boys weighing 100 pounds.
Right.
He could do push-ups.
Right.
That leaves an impression in your mind. You get 16, 17 years old. Can I put 200 pounds on my back and do push-ups?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, you start realizing who the man is.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, and it's a form of reinforcement.
Yes.
And it's a blanketed threat.
Right.
It's very quiet, but it's loud at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes, sir.
You never forget that.
Yes, sir.
Indeed.
Yes, sir. We're going to continue the discussion, and I want to talk more about, we talked about, civility and being polite, but we want to move into reason in the next segment here, Theo.
Go.
All right. All right. We want to thank you all for joining the big picture today. We're talking about lost spirits in this material world. We'll be back in a moment.